As we come to the end of the month of October, which is Respect Life Month, there's a question that I've been wrestling with a little bit. The Catholic Church has a rich tradition of social teaching, addressing everything from abortion to industrialization to environmentalism. It kind of runs the whole gamut, as I'm sure you're aware. There were 5 weekends over this month of October. I could have, in theory, addressed abortion one weekend, euthanasia another weekend, immigration one weekend, just war theory another weekend, and then maybe the death penalty this evening, and we would not have even scratched the surface of what the church teaches on all of these different social issues. But here's my question for y'all this evening, and perhaps this is, I don't know, maybe sort of an elephant in the room. What do we do with the fact that when it comes to the church's teachings on issues of life and justice, we all obviously have our biases. We have our biases. Some of these issues are very important to us, and some really aren't. Some of us want to perhaps stand up and cheer if we hear a homily about abortion, but a homily about immigration, Some of us would be thrilled to hear a homily about bringing an end to the death penalty, but a homily about ending gender reassignment surgeries for minors, that's too sensitive. Don't want to go there. Now, I hope it goes without saying that the Catholic social teaching is inherently biased, naturally biased. And what I mean by this is that not every issue that the church speaks out on, that the church addresses, is of the same moral importance. Okay, so there's a clear sense of hierarchy even within what the church does teach about. For instance, ending abortion and paying people a just living wage are both important issues that the Catholic Church clearly teaches on. But obviously, ending abortion is the more important issue as it directly deals with the killing of an innocent person. Both of those things, both issues rob a person of their dignity in some way. Both issues rob a person of their opportunity to flourish, but only one issue robs the person of a right to life. So obviously not every social issue that the church speaks up about is morally equivalent, even if they are both morally important. But that's not the type of bias that I want to talk about this evening. Those are natural and necessary biases. Otherwise, we would have the tendency to kind of just treat every moral issue the same. And obviously, that's not the case. What I'm talking about this evening are the biases that I think have a tendency to be far more arbitrary, the ones that seem to be more of the product of perhaps our personal politics, our personal philosophies, or perhaps even our life experiences more than anything else. One of my brother friars once lamented to me, and this is years ago, it was very powerful, and I remember it to this day. He said, "It makes me sad that the people I see at the pro-life rally are not the same people I see at the anti-war rally, and that the people I see at the anti-war rally are not the same people I see at the pro-life rally. These sides, it's like they never meet. They never overlap." And unfortunately, he's right. Every single one of us in that regard, I think, seems to almost have like moral blind spots to some extent. And it leaves us, sadly, I think, leads us to approach Catholic social teaching as kind of a buffet line of sorts, right? We've all heard that term, cafeteria Catholic. And sometimes we do that with the church's moral teaching, right? I take a little bit of what I like, and then I kind of leave the rest. Maybe somebody else can kind of care about that stuff. And unfortunately, when we get to the end of the buffet line, what our plates look like when we take them up to pay for our plates, it can be kind of predictable, right? One person's plate might have a big helping of care for the unborn and care for mothers of the unborn, and maybe a helping of zeal for ending physician-assisted suicide or something like that. And then in the next person in the line, their plate looks completely different, right? It's a helping of concern for a just living wage and prison reform and climate justice and an end to gun violence and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to be real here. Again, this is perhaps an elephant in the room, but I think it's reality. The divide is pretty predictably along political lines, if we're just being honest, right? Some Catholics will have a bias towards social causes that are considered to be more conservative. Other Catholics might have a bias towards social causes that are considered to be more politically liberal. Some people are kind of a hodgepodge, but I think that's a little bit more rare, right? I think it's fair to say that for the most part, we're can be divided, even within our church, into two camps. I keep thinking, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we all didn't have a bias towards what's on the left, what's on the right, what's conservative, what's liberal, but a bias towards what's Catholic, right? A bias towards what's Catholic. Now, sometimes I wonder if the inherent danger, as much as I love something like Respect Life Month, I think it's so awesome and needed, the inherent kind of other side of this, the darker side, is that perhaps we get sucked into talking about specific issues and we kind of forget to address perhaps the underlying principle upon which all Catholic social teaching is formed. And that is the principle that every human life has inherent dignity, that every human being, by virtue of being formed in the image and likeness of God, should be afforded basic rights to life and liberty, and given the environment and the opportunities to flourish both physically and spiritually. We may have our biases as humans, but God does not. God does not. All life is valuable to him. And I think this is something that's so clearly addressed in our readings today. We have our first reading today from Exodus. We hear God saying a variation of something that he says over and over and over again throughout the Old Testament, specifically through the prophetic writings. And that is, do not harm the poor, right? Don't exploit the poor. Do no harm to the immigrant in your midst. Don't wrong the widow or the orphan. Well, then what should we do? What should we do? Well, Jesus answers this in our gospel reading today, right? Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. They're connected, right? One feeds into the other. You can't have one without the other. In other words, fall deeply in love with the God who loves you unconditionally so that you may also love others unconditionally, just as God does. And I think, well, that's kind of the problem we run into, right? It's very hard for us to love unconditionally, without specifications, without biases. Actually, as much as we have a tendency to claim to be a loving society these days, we basically attach conditions to everything, right? I love you, I love all people, unless, unless they came to the country illegally, then not so much. I love you, unless I didn't consent to you being conceived within my womb, then I don't love you so much. I love you unless you're a criminal and you're leeching off the taxpayers' money. Well, then I don't love you so much. In 1984, Cardinal Joseph Bernardine of Chicago, he articulated what he referred to as the seamless garment doctrine. This is the idea that the Catholic moral teaching is not just a litany of teachings, it's a consistent whole, uniting ethical, religious, and political threads into a unified moral vision. That's how he described it. In other words, a Catholic social teaching should be seen as a seamless weave, like the garment of Jesus, with the dignity and the flourishing of the human person at the focal point, rather than kind of a bunch of individual threads that just stem from different ideologies. Cardinal Bernardine's hope, when he kind of defined this doctrine, was that in viewing Catholic social teaching as a continuum, rather than as an assortment of ideas, we would avoid the temptation to just kind of pluck at individual threads of the garment in order to perhaps exaggerate some and deny the importance of others. The other day, I ran into an article on National Catholic Register, and it said this of Cardinal Bernardine's document. I thought this was a great line. It said this document of Cardinal Bernardin, who's considered one of the great prelates in the American church, right? So this is no controversial figure. This is a widely respected, regarded figure. It says, this doctrine remains controversial. It remains a controversial teaching not because it is unorthodox, but because Catholic teaching is and always will be at cross purposes with political currents of this world, and is therefore prone to being cannibalized and used by ideologues rather than listened to in its fullness. Dang, that's tough. That cuts me to the core, and perhaps that resonates with you as well. Maybe that cuts you a little bit too. So here's my hope for today. When you have time, genuinely consider your own biases, right? What is it about perhaps my politics or my background or my personal philosophy, my life experiences? What is it about any of these things that has perhaps caused me to turn a blind eye, to put up blinders to certain areas of what the church teaches, of certain Catholic social teachings? Have I failed perhaps to, let's say, stand up for the dignity of the immigrant because I was afraid of being perceived as too liberal? Was I afraid to fight for the unborn because I didn't want to be perceived as too conservative? Did I stop caring about, the environment or about creation because I didn't want people to think that I was one of those, vegans from California or something? Did I fail to protect children from sexually explicit material in public schools because the news station I watch says, well, it's only, right-wing wackos who do that kind of stuff, and I didn't want to be associated with that. Lord, help me to identify my biases and to lay them at the foot of the cross. Eliminate my blind spots. Help me to not pull on the threads of your garment one by one, but to see it as a consistent weave. Help me to see this world, to see the human family, not through the lens of political problems to be solved, but through the lens of people whose dignity I should acknowledge. Because as we hear the prophets say, or as we hear in Exodus today, I have been poor. I have been poor. I have been the alien. I have been the stranger. I have been the exploited. I've been all of those things. And now I desire to love unconditionally, to love others as I am loved. And of course, pray that prayer not in my words, but in your own. And in doing so, and this is important to remember, the last point I want to make, when we pray a prayer like this, it doesn't mean that we forfeit our political opinions, we just become kind of apolitical, amorphous Catholic blobs. No, we can have political opinions. Acknowledging the dignity of every human person is one thing. And then coming to a consensus on how that dignity should be upheld is a completely and totally different thing altogether. And that's why Catholics have differing opinions on things. Newsflash, in case you didn't notice, right? But that's the realm of politics, right? There's plenty of debate to be had on these things about how we address these important issues effectively, how we adhere and acknowledge the dignity of all humans effectively. But this is also the realm of politics in that way. But when it comes to human dignity, we should strive to eliminate our biases and to love others in the model of our Heavenly Father.